In front of us right here is the HP 6000 W74 from 2009. When this computer was released, as I received it, it came with a Core 2 Duo, and it came with integrated graphics, and it came with 4 gigs of RAM. So I've taken the entire thing down. We're going to replace it with a Core 2 Quad, a Q8200S. And so instead of it being the Core 2 Duo, 2 cores, it's going to have 4 cores. So hopefully that'll make it a little bit more competent when it comes to gaming. We're going to keep the stock heatsink here. It's a nice dual heat pipe design. Unfortunately, heat pipes aren't exposed here, so we're not having copper on processor. So that'll reduce its thermal transfer a little bit, but because we're not overclocking, this is just a workstation and the CPU isn't exactly super powerful, we should be fine with that. Additionally, we're going to be adding in a Quadro 4000. So this graphics card was introduced in 2010. It's got DirectX 11, so it won't play some of the newer games like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, but it's going to play some games like Overwatch, PUBG, Fortnite, and some of the other major titles. It's got 2 gigs of RAM, and it's running 148 watts. So this was built on the Femi architecture. If you look at some of the Femi, I think the 460, 470 series cards, they have almost an identical heat dissipation design. So it's a single blower fan. It's going to be pretty loud. There's no real exhaust on the back. We have 2 display ports and 1 DVI. And so in the back here we can see the power connector. So it is a single slot. So this would even work on a smaller form factor. And then once we get this installed, you'll see that this is actually going to be interfering with this, almost interfering with the CPU cooler. So we couldn't actually use a double slot design. And to top it all off, we're going to be upgrading the 4 gigs of RAM that it came with to 8 gigs. So we're going to have 4 2 gig DIMMs, and all of these are clocked at 1,333 megahertz. And then we have our CPU here. It is an Intel Q8200S from Intel. Just your standard CPU here. So what we're going to have is a computer built in 2009, a CPU from 2008, and a graphics card from 2010. So we've got about a 2-year range here, so all of this stuff is going to be relatively compatible in terms of bottleneck. The processor isn't going to bottleneck the graphics card or vice versa, and the whole system should work out all right. A couple of things to note, though. This is the original power supply here, and it doesn't have a 6-pin. So we will be using a SATA to 6-pin PCIe adapter so we can give this power. The boards can only provide 65 watts of power. So this will help us get from 65 up to the 142 watt TDP of the graphics card. And lastly, we have 2 drives in here. So we're going to have our boot drive, which is an SSD. It's a 120 gig, $20 drive. And then we have a 2 terabyte hard disk. That'll be for a game library and any of the other heavy software that we want to install. So let's get this thing put together. So these 2 notches here are going to go into the 2 notches here, and we're going to align the gold corner with the upper right hand side. So we're just going to drop this in, and we're going to close the top cover, push the little arm down, and we are done. So next, we need to install our thermal paste. We have a little tube here. Typically just draw a little X on it so we can get some even squeeze out. We'll add that, and that should be fine. So with this, we're going to have the heat pipes facing away to the north here. So we'll be able to have the air blow right through. And then we grab our driver and we screw this down. And we screw in a cross pattern with one side, then the other receding. These are spring loaded, so they will torque out before we get to any damage. So we'll get all 4 of these down. And then We'll drop the cooler down again. So the latch locks in there, creates a tight seal. Again, the CPU isn't, the heatsink isn't symmetrical. It is offset to the left here. And then we'll take the routing, the cable routing here, and put it back in over here. Got to be careful with the older plastic. It starts to get brittle over time. So the danger is always snapping it. One of the cool features of this case is it does have an integrated speaker. This is also common on a lot of Lenovo's, but Dells don't have it. And so if you don't have a speaker hooked up, then it automatically defaults volume to there, which is kind of nice. Next, we're going to move some of the stuff out of the way here. We're going to install our RAM. So the one slot here is justified, on this case, to our right, my right. Put it in one side, then the next. Do that for all 4 sticks. We don't need to worry about pairing here, which slots apply to dual channel, because we have 4 sticks. We're going to use them all, so they will all be operating in dual channel. And lastly, we've got the stick here. Okay, RAM is all installed. Next, we're going to take our GPU. We're going to set it right down. And again, the tab on here is broken because this is an older machine. There we go. Okay, so now we got that in. We will grab ourselves a spare bracket. We'll use a one with a hole in the back. Next, this tab just goes over and clicks. The last thing we need to do is hook up our 6-pin PCIe connector. We'll also put that on there to keep this out of the way. Hook it up. And this looks like it was unplugged at some point, so we'll plug that in. We've got both of our hard drives now installed. CD-ROM is installed. Power supply is there. CPU is good. Video card is installed. RAM is there. So the CPU here is kind of unique because it does have these proprietary connectors. But in it, that's all right because we've got 2 discrete 12-volt rails on here. The first rail is going to be for our GPU. It's running 16 amp at 12 volts. So that's going to give us 192 watts. Earlier we discussed the GPU, and this one is running 142 watts TDP. So because of that, we're going to have about 26% headroom between what the CPU can get, or what the power supply can deliver, and what the GPU can take. Granted, we have to split that up also with our spinning disk, our solid state disk, and our CD-ROM, but all of those should be probably under about 20 watts. So we're getting close, but we're not there. The other piece of this is going to be a dedicated CPU rail, which is going to give us 14 amps. 14 amps at that 12 volt is 168 watts. Our CPU is rated at 95 watt TDP, so whenever it starts to boost, it'll go a little bit above that. But because this is the only thing on that rail, we shouldn't run into any issues. We're sitting at 43% headroom on that, so we should be good. So let's get some dimensions here. So the first is, you can see that the GPU is pretty close to our power supply here. So there's no way that we could do a second slot, right? And even on this, from the PCB, the circuit board, to the CPU cooler, we have 7/8 of an inch total. So the card here is right at about, it's a hair over a half. So ½ inch thick. So in terms of length, though, we've got quite a bit of ability there. We've got about 15 inches to play with. So I don't know of any graphics cards, even RTX 2080 Ti's, that are that long. And then for height, in case you want to go with a single slot, something like, I don't know why you would, but if you wanted like a Katana GTX 1070 that is a single slot just like this, we have about 6 inches comfortably of height. For fans, we're running 3.5, which I believe is 92 millimeters there. The front of the case, we don't have any provision for a fan. We have it graded here, or a hole pattern, so you could probably fashion one there. And then with your CPU cooler, pretty much anything would fit here. We can just take a couple of quick measurements just in case. in case. So again, we run the same 6-inch height there. Width before you hit anything here, if you wanted to do a tower style cooler. From there, assuming you're going to use a single slot card, you can go probably about 3.5 inches comfortably in height. In width, it's almost as long as you want it to be. I guess if we were to take it from the edge here, let's take it from the center line, which is about right here, over to our heatsink here for the board, you're running at about 2 inches. So overall, you could go probably, we're having to kind of fudge some numbers here, but you could probably go a 4-inch wide, very tall. And that's pretty much the inside of this case. So lastly, we'll take our panel here, put that on the front, close it, screw in the tab, and we are ready to work. Due to the age of this computer, running screen capture software was too resource intensive and resulted in artificially low benchmarks, so I've recorded the screen with a camera instead. So now we've got Cinebench going here, we've got 4 cores at 2.33 gigahertz. Let's hit run and see what happens. So when trying to open Apex Legends, you're greeted with an error saying unsupported CPU. The CPU does not have PopCant. This happens because the Core 2 Duo era CPUs are missing the SSE 4.2 instruction set. So in other words, they're not going to be compatible with this game. You're going to need at least an i-series. I believe that the first gen i7s did have this instruction set. So in order to play Apex Legends, you'd need at least a Core series processor. So in addition to reviewing the computers inside their hardware that they come with, the other objective of this channel is to benchmark these against other computers in a similar price range. So I put together an Excel file here where as I review these, I'll add them to this list so we can see an apples-to-apples comparison. I've created some equations here that allow us to add some certain weights to different parameters here that we're going to be benchmarking. So on the HP 6000 W7 Pro, it received an overall score of 363, which is pretty low compared to a computer such as the HP ProDesk above, which scored almost double for only $100 more. But overall, this computer, it cost $137 to build. That included the tower itself, the case, the motherboard, the 120 gig SSD that I added, the Quadro 4000 GPU, the CPU upgrade, and the 8 gigabytes of RAM. If you're on an extremely tight budget, then this would probably be a good solution. However, if you only spend a little bit more, such as the HP ProDesk above, you can get a much more capable gaming PC. Overall, though, the features of this computer are pretty neat. It's got the integrated speaker. It's got a good layout. It's got lots of space for expansion, assuming that you either keep it to a dual slot card that's short or a really long single slot card. Its Cinebench score was incredibly low. As for Overwatch and Fortnite, both of those had to be reduced below 1080 in order to even hit the 30 to 40 FPS target, and newer games weren't even attempted. Apex Legends, we saw the error come up whenever we tried to play it. COD Modern Warfare, I've tried it on similar computers, and it hasn't run on the older Quad series processors like the one in this machine. So overall, The computer didn't score very well, but that's reflected in the price. And I would appreciate if you have any feedback on, was this video helpful, and trying to figure out what parts of the video were. Did you find the case layout review helpful? How to install the parts? Was the benchmarking any good? I'm looking for feedback because these videos are taking me quite a bit of time to make. Granted, I'm on a learning curve here because I've never done any video production like this before. But if I can maximize my time and maybe focus in on things that people would find valuable, that would be a better use of my time. So please let me know in the comments. And check back again because I'll have another review posted soon.